My name is Claire Donovan, and I never thought I'd be forced to choose between my unconscious son and the roof over our heads. As Eli, just 7 years old, lay in the ICU at Denver Children's Hospital, silent beneath a forest of tubes and wires, my older sister Lauren barged in with all the subtlety of a hammer and declared her ultimatum. The rent on the duplex I'd lived in for 3 stable years was now tripling, and if I couldn't cough up $6,600 by morning, I'd need to vacate immediately. No conversation, no compassion, just cold delivery of a decision she'd clearly made without a second thought. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I reached into the leather tote bag I hadn't let go of since the accident and pulled out the black envelope that had stayed hidden beneath snacks, chargers, and insurance forms. When she opened it, her perfectly manicured hands trembled, and for the first time in years, Lauren looked like she had no script to follow. But to understand the weight of that moment, you'd have to understand everything that led up to it. Lauren and I were never close. Growing up in the snowy suburbs of Denver, we weren't oil and water, we were fire and frost. Lauren, the polished prodigy, the daughter who never brought home less than an A and could charm the elderly neighbors with a single dimpled smile. I was the quiet one, the girl who painted her feelings into sketchbooks because words rarely worked in our house. My parents, Charles and Deborah Donovan, adored Lauren. Her piano recitals, debate competitions, and volunteer projects took center stage. When she sneezed, the house paused. When I scored goals in soccer, they'd glance up from their phones with a tired clap. My father used to say Lauren reminded him of himself, ambitious, strategic, a future CEO. When I got caught sketching during a dinner party, my mother scolded me for being distracted and odd. I started babysitting at 13 to buy art supplies. At 15, I filed my own taxes. At 17, I turned down a full ride to an art school across the country just to keep living at home rent-free while I worked 3 part-time jobs and saved. Lauren, meanwhile, breezed into Stanford and posted filtered photos from Italy, Hong Kong, and Prague, all under the caption, "Work hard, play harder," though the playing seemed to dominate. When Dad passed suddenly from a stroke, and Mom followed less than a year later after a short, fierce battle with pancreatic cancer, Lauren came home wearing black heels and a blacker mood. I didn't cry at the will reading because I'd already cried for everything else. Lauren got the house, the cash, the life insurance. I got a letter from our father, handwritten and folded in thirds, saying, "Claire, you've always stood on your own. Here's something to secure your future when you're ready for it." It was a trust not accessible until I turned 30. At the time, I was 26 and already self-sufficient, freelancing graphic design for national brands, living frugally in a downtown apartment, and navigating a crumbling marriage to a man who gambled like it was his birthright. By the time I turned 30, I'd divorced him, won sole custody of Eli, and built a small but loyal client base that let me work from home. And when the trust became mine, I didn't use it to buy luxury or take revenge. I used it to build something, an LLC I called Northgate Horizons. Real estate investing, quiet and methodical. My first purchase? A modest group of duplexes and triplexes on the west edge of Denver, including, yes, the one where Lauren had lived since Mom's passing. I didn't want her to know. I had Benjamin, my lawyer, handle all communications. Lauren thought she was dealing with a faceless investment firm, and frankly, that worked best for both of us. I rented the unit next to hers when Eli and I needed a clean start. Lauren didn't recognize the LLC name, and I didn't volunteer information. She liked thinking she had leverage, another thing to hold over me like an expensive purse. She was the landlord, after all. She set the rent, though I knew it was above market. I paid on time every month, and the payments came right back through my own company's ledgers. I even paid for repairs and upgrades myself, just to keep the peace. I told myself it was easier that way. For 3 years, that peace held. Eli flourished in his new school. My business grew. I decorated our small home with thrifted finds and warm colors and built a little oasis for my son. He had a fascination with dinosaurs and outer space, loved building worlds with his hands, and often asked me if astronauts painted when they weren't busy floating. I told him he could do both. I believed it. Until the day I got the call. April 10th. I remember because it was the first morning in weeks that I had taken my coffee hot. Eli kissed me at the door and said, "See you after school, Mommy. Don't forget it's pizza day." I watched his bus disappear down the street, not knowing that by 2 p.m. I'd be screaming into my steering wheel in a school parking lot, begging the universe not to take my baby. He fell from a climbing structure during recess. A spinal twist, a head injury. He was airlifted to Denver Children's and rushed into emergency surgery. The doctors told me words like swelling and induced coma and 72-hour watch. I didn't sleep for 36 hours. Hannah, my old college roommate, now a teacher at Eli's school, brought me clean clothes and drove me home to shower. That's when Lauren showed up, in heels, carrying a $1,400 handbag, not to bring food or offer a ride or even see Eli. She showed up with an eviction notice. Her reasoning? She'd overextended financially, made some investment miscalculations, and needed to triple my rent to cover her own expenses. I stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Rent. While my son fought for his life. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. The one I'd carried for years without knowing exactly when it would be needed. Lauren opened it with the smug expectation of a woman about to receive a check. What she found was something else entirely. Something that would change everything. The moment Lauren unfolded the documents and read the first line, I saw the arrogance drain from her face like color from an overexposed photograph. Her brows knit in disbelief as she flipped through pages bearing legal headers, ownership transfers, and signatures that all pointed to one irrefutable truth. "Northgate Horizons is yours?" she said finally, her voice higher than usual, strained. "You own the duplex? And the others?" I nodded slowly, watching her process the collapse of a narrative she had clung to for years, that I was the little sister beneath her heel, the tenant at her mercy, the one always needing to catch up. "Since when?" she demanded, her tone brittle. "Almost 5 years now," I said, my voice calm but clipped. "I bought them when the property management company put the portfolio up for sale. You didn't even try to buy them, Lauren. You were too busy funding a travel agency during COVID and betting on that NFT disaster." She opened her mouth to protest, but closed it again when no defense came. "So this whole time, I've been your tenant?" "Technically, yes," I said, "but I didn't say anything because I knew how you'd react. This right here is exactly why I kept it quiet." She gripped the edge of the visitor's chair like the floor might betray her too. "You lied to me." "I protected my peace," I said, the words harder than I expected. "There's a difference." She blinked fast, the way she always had when on the verge of losing control. "So what? You're kicking me out now. Is this revenge?" I shook my head. "I'm not you, Lauren. I don't weaponize housing in the middle of a family emergency." At that moment, Natalie, the night nurse, entered to check Eli's vitals. Her eyes swept over the room and the tension hanging in the air like invisible fog. "Everything okay here?" she asked in a tone that brooked no nonsense. "We're just finishing a conversation," I said. Lauren stood, crumpling the envelope slightly in her grasp, and walked toward the door. But before she left, she turned and said, "This isn't over, Claire." I met her gaze evenly. "It actually is." The door shut with a soft click, and Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Family," I said, by way of explanation, and she gave a knowing hum as she scribbled notes on Eli's chart. I resumed my post by Eli's bedside, his hand so small and pale in mine, the machines surrounding him beeping steadily. But I was no longer just tired or afraid, I was furious. Not just at Lauren, but at myself for all the years I'd bitten my tongue, let her take up space in my life as if her dysfunctions were just another part of the family furniture. That night, I barely slept. Around 2:30 a.m., I must have dozed off for 15 minutes because when I awoke it was to the sound of machines screaming, alarms, nurses rushing, Eli's body arching violently in his hospital bed. "Seizure!" Natalie shouted, pressing the call button and lowering the bed with swift, practiced hands. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs. Dr. Wells appeared within moments, his calm expression now steely with focus. "We need to get him into surgery," he said. "His brain pressure has spiked again." I signed the emergency consent forms with hands that could barely hold the pen. 4 hours later, Dr. Wells came into the waiting room still in scrubs, the skin beneath his eyes drawn with exhaustion. "We've stabilized him," he said. "We had to remove a section of his skull to relieve the pressure, a common step in severe TBI cases, but he made it through. The next 48 hours will be critical." I nodded, hollow. "Can I see him?" "Soon," he promised. "Let us get him settled." I don't remember texting Hannah, but she arrived 30 minutes later, wide-eyed and breathless. I broke down in her arms, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. The terror and fury I'd kept locked away finally clawing their way out. "He's all I have," I gasped. "He's everything." She held me tighter. "He's not going anywhere," she said, and I almost believed her. By the time I was allowed back into Eli's room, he was pale and still again, wrapped in gauze, wires protruding from everywhere. But he was alive. I sat in the same chair as before, took his hand, and whispered stories to him like I had when he was a toddler afraid of thunder. The next few days passed in a blur of monitoring, charts, and cautious hope. Tyler's no, Eli's vitals held steady. The swelling receded. The sedation tapered. On the 5th morning, as I was brushing my teeth in the family restroom, my phone buzzed with a dozen notifications. Lauren, angry texts, defensive ones, then desperate ones. The last said, "We need to talk today." Hannah looked over my shoulder as I stared at the screen. "You don't owe her anything," she said. "Your focus is Eli." "I know," I sighed, "but I'd rather deal with her now than have her linger like a thundercloud." I texted back, told her to meet me at the hospital cafeteria at 3 p.m., when Eli would be undergoing tests and I'd have half an hour to spare. I also called Benjamin and asked him to draft a formal lease agreement. "You're well within your rights to evict her," he said, "but it might be cleaner to draw hard boundaries instead. Legal ones. Do both, I said, just in case. At 3 p.m. sharp, Lauren walked in looking different. Minimal makeup, casual clothes, no accessories screaming status. "How's Eli?" she asked first. "Stable," I said cautiously. "They think he'll wake up soon." "That's really good," she said. And for once, it sounded real. She sat across from me and didn't speak again for a full minute. Then, quietly, I called Benjamin. He confirmed everything. I nodded, waiting. "You really own all of it. You've owned it for years. You never said a word. You let me believe I was—" She trailed off. "In control?" I supplied. "Yes." "I didn't say anything," I replied, "because I knew you'd turn it into a power game. You always do. Even now, you tried to use rent as leverage in a crisis. If I hadn't handed you that envelope, you would have kicked your sister and nephew out of their home while he was in a coma." She looked ashamed, but didn't apologize, not yet. I slid the lease across the table. 1-year lease, $2,200 a month, due on the 1st, no late payments, no favors. This is business now. She picked it up, eyes wide. "You're still letting me stay?" "Yes," I said simply, "but with boundaries. I won't allow your chaos to shape my life anymore. Not now, not ever again." For once, Lauren didn't argue. She nodded, folded the lease, and tucked it into her purse. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't reply. My phone buzzed. A message from Natalie. He opened his eyes. "Come now." I stood up so fast the chair scraped the tile. "I have to go." "Wait," Lauren said. "Can I come too?" Her voice shook. "Just for a minute?" I studied her. The pride seemed gone, the walls crumbling. I nodded once. "You can try, but if it's too much for him, you leave. No discussion." "Understood," she said, and for the first time in our lives, she meant it. Eli's room was dimly lit when we arrived, the soft beeping of monitors syncing almost rhythmically with the flicker of hope beating in my chest. Dr. Wells stood beside the bed, his expression calm but alert as he looked down at my son, whose eyes were now half open, fluttering with effort as if waking from a long and treacherous dream. "Eli," I whispered, stepping closer, my hands trembling as I reached for his. "Baby, it's Mama. I'm here." His gaze drifted slowly across the room, unfocused at first, then stilled on my face as if he was trying to recognize a memory that had stayed with him in the dark. He didn't speak, couldn't yet, the breathing tube still doing its work, but I saw the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth and the light dim but there in his tired eyes. "That's it, sweetheart," I whispered, brushing a curl from his forehead. "You're safe. I'm right here." Lauren stood by the door, her arms wrapped around her stomach as if holding herself together. Her lips trembled. I didn't say anything to her. Didn't need to. Eli's presence filled the space. His heartbeat echoed on the monitors, and for now, that was enough. Over the next week, Eli's recovery unfolded in cautious increments. The breathing tube came out. His speech returned in short, whispered fragments. He asked for water, then cartoons, then his Legos. He recognized everyone, me, Hannah, even Marcus when the old man came in with the stuffed Tyrannosaurus and the grin of a grandfather who'd aged backwards from relief. What stunned me most was that he remembered Lauren. "Aunt Lo?" he rasped, on the third morning of his awakening, blinking slowly as she stood awkwardly at the foot of his bed. "Hi, buddy," she said, her voice cracking. "I brought you something." She held out a space-themed night light that projected constellations across the ceiling. Eli's face lit up like sunrise. "That's so cool," he whispered. "You remembered I like stars." "Of course," Lauren replied, clearly startled by his reaction. "I remember a lot more than you think." Later, when Eli was asleep again, I walked Lauren to the elevator. She didn't speak until the doors dinged open. "I signed the lease," she said, pulling the folded contract from her bag. "And I'm looking into that financial counselor you mentioned, the one that helps with compulsive gambling." "Good," I said. "You need it. For yourself, for your future." She nodded. "I also sold some things, my watches, a few purses, paid off a chunk of what I owe you." That surprised me. Lauren, parting with her designer collection, was like a dragon giving away its gold. But more than that, her tone had changed. She wasn't posturing or begging, just stating facts. "They're just things," she added, shrugging. "When I saw Eli lying there, I realized how pointless it all was. All that crap I bought, I couldn't trade any of it to help him, couldn't even buy back your trust." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She stepped into the elevator, and just before the doors closed, she looked up and said softly, "I'm trying. It's harder than I thought, but I'm trying." The doors shut. I stood there for a long moment, letting those words settle. Trying. Not perfect, not even good yet, but trying. And for Lauren, that was seismic. 3 weeks later, Eli came home. He wore a special helmet to protect his skull and moved more slowly than before, but his spirit had returned, bubbling up in questions about black holes and volcanoes and whether superheroes wore protective gear. I cried in the hallway when I saw him walk through the front door on his own, backpack slung over his shoulder like it weighed nothing, his arms raised like a champion. "I win," he declared to no one and everyone. Hannah had decorated the living room with a big blue banner that read, "Welcome home, Space Commander." Marcus brought lasagna. Benjamin dropped off a gift card to a meal delivery service and a packet about pediatric brain trauma support groups. We all ate together in a kind of hushed celebration, aware that normalcy was still a fragile thing, but clinging to the joy of this moment anyway. Lauren didn't come that night, but she sent a message. "Don't want to overwhelm him. I'll stop by tomorrow." That kind of consideration from her was new, unexpected, and it felt genuine. True to her word, she arrived the next day carrying a model solar system kit and a bag of Eli's favorite sour gummy stars. "You want to hang these up with me?" she asked as he sat on the living room rug sorting his Legos. "Totally," he said, "but we have to do it in orbit order." She laughed and sat down cross-legged beside him, and as I watched them, my sister, awkwardly reading planet names upside down while my son corrected her, I felt something shift inside me. A softening. Maybe not full forgiveness, but a willingness to believe in the possibility of change. Over the following weeks, we settled into a rhythm. Eli's days were divided between therapy sessions and slow reintegration into school. My work resumed on a flexible schedule. Lauren paid her rent early. She even started helping with small things around the duplex, replacing light bulbs, painting the back fence. Our conversations remained cautious, like walking across a bridge we weren't quite sure would hold. But we walked it anyway. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, Eli came into the room and asked, "Mom, are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He fiddled with the hem of his shirt, thinking. "I mean, Before everything happened, you were tired a lot. You smiled, but it looked like pretend. Now it feels real." I stared at him, stunned by his insight, and knelt down. "You're right," I said. "I was tired from carrying too much for too long, and I didn't always know how to stop pretending, but now things are changing. I'm learning to be real, like you." He grinned. "I like you better this way." That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in weeks. I wrote about resilience, about family, about how clarity sometimes arrives in the middle of chaos like lightning in a storm. And I wrote this: "I'm not who I was before the accident. I'm someone stronger." And that strength was born in the fire of fear, in the crucible of betrayal, and in the quiet power of choosing boundaries over appeasement. And tomorrow I would begin writing the rest of the story. Spring in Denver that year arrived with a patience I hadn't known I needed. The snow melted slow, the trees bloomed late, and Eli's recovery unfolded just the same, deliberate, imperfect, but full of small miracles. By the time May warmed the sidewalks, he was back at school part-time, walking without his helmet for short intervals, and spending afternoons inventing imaginary planets that he swore NASA would want to visit. His neurologist beamed with cautious pride every time we visited, and though there were still challenges, moments of fatigue, flashes of frustration, the occasional lapse in short-term memory, Eli met them all with a resilience that astonished me daily. Lauren kept coming around. At first, it was awkward, her waiting for me to flinch, me waiting for her to revert, but neither of us did. She came to therapy check-ins, brought over snacks, asked about Eli's favorite books, even helped him with math homework, though he often corrected her with a giggle. One Thursday afternoon, she arrived holding a stack of community college brochures and slid them across my kitchen table. "Thinking of finally finishing that business degree," she said, "or maybe psychology. I've been learning a lot lately about why I did some of the things I did, why I pushed so hard to feel like I mattered." I nodded slowly. "You do matter. You just don't need to control everyone around you to prove it." She gave a small laugh. "You'd have made a decent therapist yourself, you know." "No, thanks," I replied. "I prefer helping people from behind a screen, not across a couch." We smiled, and I noticed for the first time that it didn't feel forced. It was the smile of two people acknowledging a fragile truth. This relationship wasn't built on perfection or nostalgia, but on the quiet agreement to start over without pretending nothing happened. One warm evening in June, Eli and I sat on the back porch watching the sky fade from gold to indigo. It had become our ritual, just the two of us, wrapped in blankets, sipping tea or juice, naming constellations. He leaned his head on my shoulder and asked, "Mom, are you glad it all happened?" I froze. "What do you mean?" "Not the fall part," he said, eyes serious. "Not the hurt, but everything else. Aunt Lo, you being brave, us being better." I swallowed hard. "I'm not glad you got hurt. I'd give anything to take that away from you, but what came after, yeah. I think I'm grateful for the hard parts, because they taught us who we are." He nodded slowly, then said, "I think you're stronger now." "I am," I whispered, "and so are you." That weekend, we hosted our first real family dinner since coming home. Hannah brought roasted vegetables, Marcus brought blueberry pie, and Lauren showed up early to help me hang the solar system mobile in Eli's room. As we clipped Saturn to the string, she said, "Do you think he remembers the bad parts?" I paused. "He remembers, but he remembers the love more." At dinner, Eli told everyone he wanted to be either a space doctor or a dinosaur scientist, and no one laughed or said he had to pick just one. We passed food, shared stories, toasted to healing. When I walked into the kitchen to refill drinks, I caught Lauren staring at the framed photo of our parents on the bookshelf. "They didn't raise us to be like this," she said quietly. "No," I agreed, "but we're raising ourselves now." She nodded, not looking away from the picture. "You think they'd be proud?" I thought for a moment, then replied, "Maybe, but it doesn't matter anymore. We're not living for their approval. We're living for who we're becoming." Later that night, after the dishes were done and the laughter had settled into the walls of our little home, I sat alone with my journal. I wrote about all the things I hadn't said aloud, the fear that used to keep me up, the anger that used to choke me, the small steps that had built a bridge back to myself. I wrote this: "Strength isn't loud, it's quiet. It's a whisper you tell yourself when no one else believes in you. It's choosing love without losing your boundaries. It's walking away from people who once defined you and walking toward the version of yourself that finally feels true." The next morning, Eli woke up early, already digging through a box of Legos. "What are we building today?" I asked. "A hospital spaceship," he said seriously, "for kids who get hurt in space but want to come back stronger." I smiled. "Sounds perfect. Can I help?" "You can be the chief designer," he said, handing me a tiny astronaut figure. I held it in my palm for a moment and thought about all the pieces it had taken to rebuild this life. Not just plastic bricks, but conversations, boundaries, forgiveness, and love. We'd been through the fire. We'd come out changed. But we were here. Whole, healing, and still building. And for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough.